Hello, this is Storm Warden coming at you today with another video update. And today we're going to talk about Tropical Storm Rafael, which just became Rafael yesterday. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the potential hurricane strike on Cuba, particularly the western fringes of Cuba. And then we're going to talk about what impacts this could bring to the Gulf Coast and my overall thoughts and how big of a storm could this be once it gets to the Gulf of Mexico. So if you've been liking my weather content, please subscribe. But without further ado, we can get right into this. So Tropical Storm Rafael just developed yesterday. It is a tropical storm not too far from Jamaica. And this is generally pushing, I want to say northeastward. And generally speaking, it will continue that trajectory over the next few days. And this should hit the western fringes of Cuba and then push into the Gulf of Mexico, where it looks to still be a hurricane by 7 a.m. Friday before it weakens to a tropical storm by Saturday, Sunday. And, on the current trajectory, it looks like it's headed towards Louisiana. But do not be surprised if we see more ships either west or either east. Right now, based on the look that I saw, I'm not surprised on the further west track. But again, we'll dissect this as we go through the video. So, starting off with IR satellite, you can see this is Tropical Storm Rafael. You can see there's plenty of convection. It's really starting to develop. Look like it's starting to develop some inner convection. It looks like it's doing a little curved shrimp right there. So you can tell that it's really starting to develop itself. You can see all the convection on its eastern side. And so as we go through the day today and probably through the day tomorrow, you're going to really start to see some strengthening of this system where it's forecasted to be a Category 2 on approach to Cuba. So this is going to be a pretty high impact system for Cuba, particularly those western fringes of Cuba. So if you're down in Cuba, you want to stay weather aware for potential Category 2 impacts with plenty of storm surge, plenty of flash flooding, strong winds. This is going to be a Category 2 for you guys. So this is a big deal for you guys in Cuba. So breaking down the models, and you see I have a whole bunch of tabs open here at the top. So this is gonna be one of my longer videos. So stay weather aware. But you can see how as we go through, we're starting today this morning. Let's go through time. You see that hurricane on approach to Cuba. You can see how it's a 978, 977 millibar hurricane off of GFS. So generally speaking, headed towards that Cat 2 status, and it makes the landfall on the western fringes of Cuba, bringing high impact conditions with plenty of storm surge, winds, flash flooding, all that stuff. So again, those are plenty of hazards that you want to watch out for in Cuba. If you're in Cuba, stay weather aware, get prepared, evacuate if you can, go somewhere else. But generally speaking, this doesn't look a good situation for Cuba. Plenty of high impact conditions for you guys. Now, once it leaves Cuba, there's a couple of questions. One being, how strong does it stay, and does it weaken rapidly or does it weaken steadily? Because that definitely does determine the impacts for the U.S. Now, looking at the GFS model, it generally keeps that northeastward trajectory, and then it turns it more north, and then it turns it more west, and then it kind of moves west, and then it goes into Louisiana, but it just becomes a non-event. It just really doesn't become a big event. It brings some showers into the southeast, but generally speaking, it doesn't. It's not really a big event off the 12Z GFS, which is certainly a possibility. I'm not giving my overall thoughts towards the end of the video, but this is just a 12Z GFS model that we can set considerably before it even has a chance to hit the US. So, that's obviously a good, probably best case scenario. Here we have the European model, which also develops this, takes you through Cuba as a weaker system, but the European model has a weak bias. That's with the water temperatures down here being pretty extreme, not tons of wind shear, not tons of dry air. I don't really see how this doesn't get the Cat 2 status, so I'm just kind of going to ignore the European right there. But it develops into a tropical storm, and then it kind of just pushes it west, and it kind of holds its ground. But again, it's pretty much a non-event for the European model as well. So again, you got two best case scenarios right there in the models. And generally speaking, because you have so much wind shear and dry air in the Gulf of Mexico, you don't really see a whole ton of strengthening with this system. So generally speaking, you don't have a huge system in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, looking at the Canadian model, it has a system approaching the western fringes of Cuba, and then it pushes this into the Gulf of Mexico. and then it weakens it considerably, just like all the other models, and it kind of just gets caught up in a cold front, and it just pushes northeast and brings some showers to generally the entire southeast. It just brings some showers, so it's pretty much a non-event. But it does make that impact on the western fringes of Cuba with that storm surge and that high flash flooding potential, along with the strong damaging wind gusts for the Cat 2 Hurricane Rafael. And then it just weakens it fairly quickly as it approaches the Gulf of Mexico, which is not unsurprising given the atmospheric conditions over the Gulf of Mexico. So based on what I've been seeing so far, it looks like a pretty big non-event for the Gulf of Mexico. But again, if you're on the Gulf Coast, as always, you got to watch these systems. Now, we're going to transition to the hurricane models. So this is all from 06E, which is this morning's run. They're currently running right now, but I'm just going to start with 06E runs since they're already finished and we don't have to wait on that. So we're starting with the HWRF model. And it develops this fairly quickly and gets us down to a Cat 2 Hurricane 972 on approach to Cuba. And it brings pretty bad, rough conditions for Cuba with that storm surge and that strong winds and flash flooding. And then as it passes Cuba, it remains a hurricane for quite a while, but then it rapidly weakens its system on approach to the Gulf of Mexico. And kind of like the other models, it kind of just meanders in the Gulf of Mexico in those terrible conditions of wind shear and dry air, which really helps to just decay the system altogether. That is certainly a possibility. Most models are agreeing that this does weaken to some extent in the Gulf of Mexico, so you do have some consistency in the models. Here's the HMO model, and again, it brings that impact to Cuba. And then once it passes Cuba, it remains a hurricane for quite a while, a little bit longer than the HWF model, but again, it considerably weakens the system as on its approach to the Gulf of Mexico. So we're seeing some consistency between the models, which is again unsurprising, and I'll tell you why towards the end of this video. And then it had a HAFSA model, and again, it brings that impact to Cuba. And then it weakens the system fairly quickly into the Gulf of Mexico. Granted, not as quickly as the other models, but again, you can see it's rapidly weakening the system. You can kind of see how the dry air is just tearing apart the system, because on the approach to the Gulf of Mexico, you can see how his whole western side of the system is completely bare of precipitation due to dry air and wind shear. Now here you had a HAFSB model. And again, you got an impact to Cuba. Shows a little bit of a stronger system on approach to Cuba, which is certainly possible given the atmospheric conditions on approach to Cuba. But as it enters the Gulf of Mexico, you can see it takes a little while longer for it to weaken. But again, it still weakens the system considerably. So, from what I gather from most of the models is that conditions on approach to Cuba will be a ton more favorable than they will be in the Gulf of Mexico, which is obviously good news for those along the Gulf Coast, but not good news for those in Cuba, as you can expect very rough conditions. Now, why will the system weaken considerably in the Gulf of Mexico? Well, one, all these cold fronts and deep digging troughs that have been bringing the severe weather outbreaks to the western U.S., though they have provided bad weather for them, in a sense, they do some good, and that is providing plenty of dry air and wind shear over the Gulf of Mexico, particularly the northern Gulf of Mexico. And this is a great simulation from the intelligent GFS and showing why we see significant weakening of the system. Look at this area of dry air across the western Gulf. This is an area of intense dry air across the western Gulf of Mexico. This will easily weaken the system, quite frankly. And then you combine that with the stronger wind shear on approach to the Gulf Coast, and that just completely decays the system with another deep digging trough out of the western U.S. forecasted maybe later on this weekend, which also provides another area of deeper dry air and wind shear. So again, overall, the conditions in the Gulf of Mexico are quite frankly just unfavorable for significant strengthening of the system. So again, I don't expect a huge storm on approach to the Gulf Coast, which is unsurprising. But you can see how that dry air just kind of like decays the system fairly quickly. Now, here's another simulation, which is the wind shear in the upper parts of the atmosphere. You can see how the wind shear isn't bad in the southern Gulf of Mexico, and quite frankly, it's not enough to really deteriorate the storm. But on its approach to the coast, look at all of that wind shear in the northern Gulf of Mexico. This really helps to just decay the system, and quite frankly, we end up with a non-event on the 12 GFS because of drier and wind shear. So after looking at all that, now we can break down the steering currents and look at that. So, you know, based on what I've seen, most models agree that there's going to be a ridge over top the eastern U.S., and which has been the case for pretty much since the end of October. We've had a ridge over the eastern U.S., and we had troughing out west. Troughing out west, ridging out east. With a weak system like this, it's not just going to plow right into this fairly strong ridge. What's going to happen? It's probably going to ride the base of this ridge, which is why so many models just kind of meander and go fairly far west with this system compared to further east, because it kind of just meanders around the base of that ridge. So again, the further west solutions definitely are there, because with that strong ridge over the eastern U.S., I highly doubt that we get a system that just plows into the southeast. More so, I can see a more track towards Louisiana, kind of where the National Hurricane Center is thinking right now. So, with that pretty strong ridge over the eastern U.S., I don't expect a huge system for Florida or anybody along the eastern U.S. But again, the bears watching. Now here's a European 500 millibar heights, which gives us another idea of the track of this system. You can kind of see that fairly strong ridge located over the eastern United States, which doesn't allow this system to really just plow into the ridge, which is why the European model just meanders and pushes this pretty far west towards more so far west that it even looks like it's going more towards Texas. The fairly strong ridge over top. So again, the further east tracks, are certainly, in my opinion, less likely just due to this eastern ridge. And I also think a stronger system in the Gulf of Mexico is looking a lot less likely, which it wasn't looking likely before, but it just looks even less likely with the atmospheric conditions over the Gulf of Mexico. Also, another thing that's going to limit intensity in the Gulf of Mexico is the fact that our waters have cooled significantly over the last couple of months or so, due to those deep digging troughs that have pretty much cleared the Gulf of Mexico, and that has allowed for much cooler temps, especially right along the shelf waters. And that's where you see right along that coastline, those green waters, those are significantly cooler waters compared to what we were dealing with earlier, in October and September, where we had Milton and Helene basically go through the Gulf of Mexico with extremely warm waters. This is a totally different situation. And that's why on an approach to Cuba, you're looking at a much bigger system with these much warmer waters and just basically much more favorable atmospheric conditions compared to farther north in the Gulf of Mexico. So overall, guys, based on everything that I looked at, I'm not expecting a huge system on the Gulf of Mexico. Quite frankly, I don't really think this is going to be a big event. More so, this may just be a drought helper, because there's pretty stout drought going on in the southeast. If anything, this may help drought conditions, but as far as a huge hurricane on approach to the Gulf of Mexico, highly unlikely. But if you're in Cuba, stay weather aware.